The tide brought her in on a night when the flats were running high with green light, every wave breaking into a seam of glow before it settled back into the dark. I've worked the shoal station long enough that I don't startle it much. Fish rains, storm surges, the drifting husks of old survey buoys the current drags in every decade or so. But I'd never seen anything punch a crater into the mudflat the way that pod did, and I'd never pulled anything out of one that was still breathing. She was folded into the wreck like something poured there, one arm bent wrong, her skin the pale gray of a sky before snow, dappled faintly across the shoulders in a pattern I didn't have a word for yet. Her eyes were shut, one side of her face didn't move right, the muscles slack under a bruise the color of an old storm cloud. I got her out with a cargo sling in my own back, and I carried her up the stilted walk to the station infirmary, and I didn't call it in. Not that first night. I told myself it was because the relay was down. That wasn't the whole truth. I'm not a doctor. I keep the algae vats cycling and the desalination lines clear, and twice a year I patch up a net hand who's cut himself on coral wire. But I know what starvation looks like, and what 6 months adrift does to a body, and I had the medical kit and the time, so I used both. I fed her through a line for 11 days before her throat could take water on its own, and turned her every 4 hours so the pressure sores wouldn't take hold. I talked to her the way you talk to anyone who might be listening from somewhere far down inside themselves. Not because I expected an answer, but because silence in that room had a weight I didn't want her carrying alone. On the 12th day, her right eye opened. It didn't focus, it rolled, unseeing, the way a newborn's does. But it opened, and stayed open a few seconds longer each day after that, and on the 16th day it found my face and held there, and something in my chest turned over like a stone in a current. She couldn't speak. Whatever had happened to her, the crash, or whatever came before it, because that pod hadn't drifted out here by accident, not with the burn scoring on its hull, had taken her voice along with the use of half her face. But that eye worked, and it was quick, and I started noticing it did things. Held a beat longer on yes than no, widened, deliberate, when I misread her. I've spent my life reading tide charts and pressure gauges, patterns that mean something if you're patient enough to sit with them, and I decided her eye was a gauge too, and I started keeping a log. 1 blink, slow, yes. 2, quick, no. A held stare, wait, meaning I hadn't understood, meaning try again. It took most of a week to be sure I wasn't just hearing what I wanted to hear. It took 3 more to build anything past yes and no, a widen for pain, a specific flutter, 3 fast then a hold, that I eventually understood meant cold, because the infirmary ran the vents too hard, and she had no way to say so any other way. I brought her a second blanket that night and her eye did something I can only call relief. I named her Ione, at first, because I needed to call her something and she couldn't tell me otherwise. It took 19 days before I learned, letter by aching letter, tracing the alphabet across a slate and watching her eye stop dead on each right character, that her name was already close enough. Ione Vasa Threll, and that back where she came from, wherever that was, people had knelt when she walked into a room. She didn't tell me that last part with pride. She told it to me the way you'd report a fact about someone else's life, someone she used to be. I kept the logbook going anyway, filled 3 notebooks with her blinked words translated into my clumsy shorthand. I didn't know, then, that I was building evidence. I thought I was just trying to give a woman back her voice one flutter of an eyelid at a time, because it seemed like the only decent thing to do, and because the tide station was quiet enough that I had all the hours in the world to sit at her bedside with a slate, and enough patience to fail at it slowly. The station isn't much. 4 stilted platforms over a tidal flat that glows blue-green when the current stirs it awake, a net crew that rotates through every 6 weeks, and me, mostly alone with the vats and turbines and the long hours between deliveries. I'd tell her about it in the evenings once the questions on the slate ran dry, how the flat looked from the high catwalk at low tide, all that pale mud lit up like a held breath. She'd watch me talk the way you watch weather come in, patient, unreadable, and some nights her eye would hold on mine a beat longer than the code required, and I stopped needing the slate to know that meant something too. There was a night, maybe the 4th week, when I found her not signaling cold this time but simply awake, staring at the ceiling with a look I hadn't cataloged yet. I asked what it was. She spelled it letter by letter, slower than usual, like the word cost her something. Home, not a request, just the shape of a thing she was turning over. I didn't have an answer for that one, so I sat with her until she blinked twice, slow, the sign we'd settled on for enough for now. 6 weeks in, the Reclamation Authority found the pod's beacon signature in a routine sweep, and a warden named Bellick Thorne set his cutter down on our landing pad with a requisition order and no patience for my questions. Pod's registered military salvage, he told me, standing in my own infirmary like he owned the deck under his boots. Alloys worth more than this whole station. Cargoes listed non-recoverable. Biological, comatose, terminal projection. Standing order is dispose and reclaim. He looked at her the way you'd look at a crate that had cracked open wrong. She's moved to the hold within the hour. I told him she wasn't cargo. He told me the manifest disagreed with me, and manifest didn't get overruled by a maintenance tech's feelings. So I put 3 notebooks in his hands instead of feelings. He didn't want to read them. I made him. 6 weeks of blinked answers, dated, timed, cross-checked against questions I'd asked her twice a day just to be sure I wasn't inventing a mind where there was only reflex. What hurts? Are you cold? Do you want the light lower? Do you remember your name? Page after page of a person answering. Somewhere around the 40th page his jaw stopped working the way jaws work when a man is deciding whether to be embarrassed. This isn't reflex, he said finally, like it cost him something to say it. No, I said. It's a woman talking. The only way she's got left to do it. He was still weighing the manifest against the notebooks, still a company man with a schedule, when Ione's hand found the edge of the cot and pushed, slow, deliberate, until she was half sitting up for the first time since the crash. Her jaw worked. The slack side of her face fought her the whole way. What came out wasn't loud, and it wasn't smooth, but it was a full sentence, and I understood every word of it before Thorne's translator unit even finished catching up. I am not, she said. You're cargo. Thorne stood there a long moment. Then he did the only thing a man in his position could do with any grace. He logged the correction himself, right there on his own slate, and told his cutter to radio ahead that the recovery was void, subject alive and self-declaring, filed under rescue protocol instead of salvage. He didn't apologize. Men like him rarely do. But he took his crate eyes off her, and that was its own kind of apology. She's still healing. The right side of her face is coming back slow, and some mornings her voice won't hold a full sentence and we go back to the slate out of habit more than need, though I notice now she reaches for it herself sometimes, before I can offer it. A relay message came through last week from whatever remains of a house that once answered to her name, careful and distant, asking after her condition and offering passage. She had me read it to her twice, then asked, slate in her lap, whether the net crew still needed a hand-mending line when the weather turned rough. I told her they always did. She wrote back to the relay herself, in her own slow hand, not yet, thank you. She could leave. There's a fleet somewhere that would take her back to whatever throne she walked away from, or was taken from. We still don't fully know which. She hasn't asked to go. Most evenings she sits at the edge of the dock with me instead, watching the tide come up green. When I ask her what she's thinking, she still sometimes just blinks it to me instead of speaking, slow, twice, unhurried, and I've stopped needing the slate to translate that one. It means she's exactly where she means to be. I've learned to wait for both kinds of answers now, the spoken and the blinked. I don't think I'll ever stop. Some gauges you don't read because you have to. You read them because somewhere along the way you started caring what they had to say.